Tell me, Tom, which drugs do you take that make you so chilled out? And Tom's answer, I've never smoked a cigarette in my life, let alone taken any drugs. I believe in Jesus. And Renee responded, what's with this Jesus? I work with him all the time at the airport. He's the God of the Christian pilgrims, but I'm Jewish. Guess what Tom said to that? He's the Lord and he's Jewish too. Renee's eyes brightened, and for the first time, she was beginning to see spiritually. She began to see Jesus in a different light. But of course, she couldn't believe just because of Tom. That might not seem sincere. She needed to check it out for herself and learn more about this Jesus. So she went home and began to do that. Within 3 months, she knew that Jesus was the Lord of her life, that he had died for her sins, that he himself was innocent. So at 5 o'clock one morning, when she'd flown into Tel Aviv again to be met by Tom, she said to Tom in the car, I don't know how to pray. So Tom showed her how to pray. And she says, in that meeting in the car, Tom led her to the Lord. And before they got out, he proposed to her. And 3 months later, they were married. She marvels that God could take someone so damaged by abuse and hardship and drugs and give them a fresh start and turn their life around completely. Just a little sort of postscript. After their marriage, Tom's basketball career brought him right here to Australia. And as I reflect back, I have to say I very nearly met Tom. I was a basketball player in my youth, which is why my knees are no good now. And one weekend I played against the team, in the Sydney team that he later joined. I don't even remember who won, but I played against the team. If it had been a year or two later, Tom Bender would have been on that team and I'd have met him. He played basketball in Australia for a number of years. They lived in Australia for 26 years. They had a son named Joshua. And then they returned to Israel, where they worked amongst the Arabs and Jews of northern Israel, doing street work and evangelistic work. Sadly, Tom died in 2014, but the Reverend Ronnie Bender is still ministering in Israel, and she still firmly believes in the soon return of Jesus. So she's a good Adventist, although she's not a Seventh-day Adventist. That's my story, and when I found that story online, I was quite excited. That might pinch your bits of paper. At Jacob's Well, our sermon for this morning, we meet two Samaritans in the New Testament. In Luke 17, a grateful leper. And of course, in John 4, a woman of Sychar at Jacob's Well. The woman is known in the Eastern Orthodox tradition by the name of Photini, P-H-O-T-I-N-I. Now, I have no idea whether that was actually her name, but that's what the Eastern Orthodox believers call her, Saint Photini, the enlightened one. By the way, I know there's also a mention in the New Testament of the Good Samaritan, but that was a character in a story Jesus told. He may or may not have been an actual person. The conversation Jesus had with Photini is the longest conversation Jesus had with anyone that's recorded in the New Testament. And the interesting thing about it is she does almost as much talking as he does. She was not a passive listener. And indeed, she showed herself to be an intelligent woman. Jesus impressed her. Notice what she said to her neighbors after meeting him. John 4:39, he told me everything I ever did. Really? In one short conversation, is that possible? Well, of course not. It's an obvious exaggeration. But Jesus had made a huge impact on this woman. Bettini was a regular at the well. It was her source of water for much of the year. But when the well ran dry, as it did by about the end of May every year, she must have had another source of water. That well is not fed by a spring, it's only fed by the rainwater, and it dries up. All right. On this particular day, she had a strange encounter at the well with a man she'd never seen before. It was a very surprising encounter. The first surprise was that this stranger actually spoke to her. What might she have thought about a strange man trying to chat her up at the well? You'll recall she had a history with men. Perhaps she thought to herself, nothing new here, I'll soon sort him out. And from his appearance and speech and manner, she identified him as a Jew. Jewish men didn't acknowledge women in public, not even their own wives. It was beneath their dignity. And no Jew, male or female, would pass the time of day with a Samaritan. The feeling, of course, was mutual. Samaritans were just as prejudiced against Jews. Luke tells us about that in chapter 9. You'll recall Jesus was on his way up to Jerusalem, and he sent the disciples into a Samaritan village, because to travel from Galilee to Jerusalem, you go through Samaria. He sent the disciples in to prepare a village and get them ready for his arrival. And what did the people say? They didn't want to know. And what did the disciples do? They wanted to torch the village. They wanted to burn it down, which illustrates the lack of love that sort of existed between Jews and Samaritans. Well, the woman had no fear of Jesus. She would deal with him. But she was curious to know what he wanted. When he asked her for a glass of water, well, for water, don't know whether she had a glass. Jesus asked her for a drink of water. She began by stating the obvious. You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman, double strikeout there. Why are you even talking to me? You know the rules. We're enemies. We hate each other. We don't do favors. Now, she might not have said those exact words, but that was the exact message. Interestingly, however, they were talking. Jesus' simple request for water had started a conversation. And in his second utterance, he brought God into it. Verse 10, if you only knew the gift God has for you and who you're talking to, you would ask me for water. And I wouldn't just give you water, I'd give you living water. By now, Bettini was really puzzled. The man had asked her for a drink because he couldn't access the water. Now, what's he doing? He's offering to give her water. Was he joking? Was he trying to make her look foolish? What game did he think he was playing? She decided to go on the offensive by unleashing a blitz of questions. And these questions were designed to unsettle Jesus and put him on the defensive. Here's how their conversation went. Starting with Bettini. I see you don't have a rope. You don't have a bucket either, do you? How do you plan to get water with no rope and no bucket? Do you know how deep this well is? You've got no way of getting water from the well, have you? What did you call it? Living water? And she ended with a statement of fact that interestingly linked them. You're a Jew. Our mutual ancestor Jacob dug this well. It provided water for himself, his family, and his entire household. Now let's just pause at this point for a minute. What do we know about this well that Jacob was supposed to have dug 1,500 years earlier? I did a bit of research because I didn't know much about it either. A Major Anderson visited this well in 1866 and, for our benefit, left a description of it. The well had a narrow opening, just wide enough for a man to pass through. The narrow neck was 1 meter long. It's a cylindrical well, about 2 meters in diameter. When first dug, it was more than 40 meters deep. Seriously deep well. You know, we used to have wells in Kiribati on the atoll of Avamama. If you dug more than about 3 or 4 feet down, well, if you dug down about 3 or 4 feet, you would get fresh water. If you dug another 18 inches, you get salt water. So the people would dig shallow wells. That would be their supply of water. This well was not 3 or 4 feet deep. It was 40 meters deep. Churches have been built over the well over the years, but for long periods, it's been left open to the elements. And guess what happens to a well when that happens? It begins to get filled in. So today, it's not 40 meters deep. It's only about 23 meters deep. As I said, Jacob is believed to have died around 1500 BC. So the well was 1500 years old when Jesus and his disciples stopped there on that day on their journey back to Galilee. Well, back to John's story. Jesus had listened patiently to the woman. She had spoken the truth, but it was superficial. Jesus wanted to go deeper. So in verse 13, he said, anyone who drinks this water will thirst again, but those who drink the water I give will never thirst again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within, giving them eternal life. Was she impressed? Her reply comes to us in plain text. There's no body language, no tone of voice, no facial expression, no gestures. It's rather flat and emotionless. We miss the feeling in her words. The idea of never thirsting again after one draught of magic water seemed to her a bit fanciful. So try to imagine a touch of cynicism in her voice when she says, well, you'd better give me some of this water of yours, 1 drink and no more thirst. Really? You don't know much about doing business, do you? You've got to keep the customers coming back.